was great.
All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the Q&A. We're really excited to dive into this with y'all. And my name is Roy Arthur Blodgett. I'm going to be hosting here alongside this dynamic duo. Mariah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mariah Healey, author of Reptifiles and professional reptile husbandry researcher and consultant.
Let's hear it, Phil.
And Phil.
Whoa, dude! How dare you? No, just yeah. I'm Philip Leitz, and I'm the owner of Arids Only and the co-host of the Project Herpetoculture podcast with Roy.
Yes, indeed, that's us. And
It's true.
yeah, we're really excited to dive into the Q&A. Before we do, we want to talk a little bit about our generous hosts for this stream, and that is Happy Dragons. And Happy Dragons is doing some awesome stuff. We've got a Q1 calendar here that I'm going to share on screen about some of the upcoming stuff that we've got coming down the pipeline. Phil and I are going to be doing a live podcast next weekend. And then the following weekend, we're going to have a webinar stream about the history of herpetoculture. So that should be a lot of fun. And yeah, Phil's going to tell y'all a little bit about the new Happy Dragons Plus subscription.
Yeah, for sure, guys. So a little bit about Happy Dragons Plus and the launch of it. It's the ultimate subscription designed to help you on your reptile care journey. Here are a few of the things that you will get with a Happy Dragons Plus subscription. Subscribers can submit photos and questions for interactive live stream content like the Q&A that we're doing today and the enclosure review that we did last time. Future live streams will include both public streams like this one that subscribers can be a part of, as well as private streams that will be exclusively streamed on Happy Dragons Plus. Happy Dragons Plus has several Q&A forums where you can ask experts like the wonderful Mariah Healey of Reptifiles and other breeders that you can ask them your questions directly. Early notifications of breeder listings and ability to reserve animals first before the general public. You'll immediately get access to exclusive discounts for supplies and brands that partnered with Happy Dragons, starting with a $50 off Bug Factory pod. In the coming weeks, we will also be launching the Happy Dragons Supply Store, where we will be offering discounts for Happy Dragons Plus members. And in the next few months, we'll also have online courses curated by reptile experts on various topics, like raising feeders at home and other really awesome subject matter. You can join Happy Dragons Plus for just $9 a month, or you can save by subscribing quarterly for $25 for 3 months. Quarterly subscribers will also have access to personalized enclosure consulting with Mariah, and will be the first to try new features. If you want to try out Happy Dragons Plus, sign up now and you'll get a 1-week free trial. The link to claim your free trial is in the video description, and we will be dropping it in the chat. We've already had some really passionate and interesting people join the community, and we are looking forward to creating a place where everyone can share their knowledge and we can all learn from one another.
Heck yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Phil.
Swag.
And yeah, with that, I think we are going to move on to the content portion of our stream here, and we're going to do some chatting about your questions, I guess, that you've submitted. So we have priority for some folks from Happy Dragons Plus who've already submitted their questions, so we're going to start there. And Mariah, do you have those up, or?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to maybe read them off, and then we can kind of just go one by one?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Cool.
So, yeah, let's do the first one. I'll take it since it was emailed to me.
Okay.
And the short version is, I'm wondering if you can talk about ball pythons going off food. Oh, this is from Chloe T, by the way. I'm wondering if you can talk about ball pythons going off food for an extended period, and if it becomes detrimental to their health or weight, if feeding live is always required as the last resort, if nothing else works. If an adult ball python has reliably eaten frozen thawed and they're anywhere between 4 to 12 years old, is it possible to just wait out their hunger strike with frozen thawed, quail, rats, mice, etc., and not resort to live or fresh killed prey? Or, despite a stellar feeding record with frozen thawed, is this something any ball python might require? I read that baby ball pythons are often fed live pinky mice, so I basically worry that reverting could be possible from that alone. There's a lot to unpack here. So this is, if I understand correctly from the additional context that was emailed to me, Chloe, this is something that you've heard about as a problem with ball pythons since you're considering buying one or adopting one. And yes, ball pythons do go off feed routinely. What I have noticed, though, is that the ball python community tends to really make a big deal out of ball python fasting when it's in fact a very natural behavior for them. And if you are really fixated on, some communities are like, ball pythons must eat every like 1 to 2 weeks or else you're doing something wrong. Like if they ever miss a feed, that's a problem. And one, that's called power feeding. And like unless you're raising a hatchling, they really do not need to eat that often. They're pythons. They have very slow digestive tracts, meant to be extremely efficient with what they eat. From a very interesting paper I read on the nature of Burmese python digestion, which I imagine is very similar to ball python. There's been no studies that I'm aware of. Their digestive tract essentially like rebuilds itself after taking in a meal. And then after it's been fully digested and the nutrients assimilated, it shrinks back down to virtually nothing so that the maintaining those cells of those organs doesn't raise the metabolism beyond what is bare minimum, basically, for the animal to stay alive, and so it can ration those calories and nutrients to go as long as possible. Pythons are really amazing animals. Their digestive tracts are something else. Now, I bring this up because if you feed a python too often, you're not allowing its digestive tract to rest. And not allowing animals to rest, as we all know, whether, it's a human, a reptile, even a fish, if they can't rest, they die. uh, and you can shorten lifespans that way. We've seen lots of examples of animals where if you don't provide winter cooling, or rather, if you do provide annual winter cooling or hibernation, they're living longer than the ones that don't. And I imagine there's also some healing that goes on during that process that also helps prevent certain disorders and diseases. Now, with ball pythons, it really does depend from animal to animal and the climate in which you live, as well as the climate of your own home, the light cycle that they're exposed to. There are a lot of factors that go on here. But the bottom line is, generally speaking, ball pythons do fast. And it's a normal, natural, healthy behavior that the animal should be able to undergo without any negative effects. My own ball python will fast. She's about a 6, 7-year-old adult right now. And for the past several years, she does a winter fast that lasts about 5 to 6 months. It's an incredibly long time. And she doesn't really lose condition. It helps her keep a really good body condition. She does not have a lot of excess fat on her. And then just during her waking period, I make sure that she's exercising or has, as desired, getting the UVB, offering food regularly according to what she wants. So it's really not much to stress about. If the animal's not losing condition, it's okay to just let them take the lead. And since you're looking at adopting an adult ball python, Chloe, that would be what you're looking at, is probably an animal that is going to fast and go inactive, hide for months at a time. And that's okay. It's freaky. It's a little boring, honestly, because you're like, yeah, live in there. And it's okay, if you're feeling anxious to go in and check on the animal. But really, the winter fasting is not something to be too worried about. And if they are refusing food, check how often you're feeding them, because if the animal's well enriched and it's refusing food, you could be offering food too often. Or that is a sign of another health problem, that maybe you want to reevaluate a few things, take them to a vet to get checked. But for the most part, the skipping meals thing with ball pythons is not as big of an issue as a lot of people say it is. And to address the last aspect of your question, live is very rarely required to get an animal eating that is accustomed to eating frozen thawed. If it's accustomed to eating live, that's another thing. It has trouble recognizing frozen thawed prey as food. But if it already knows that frozen thawed is food and has been doing it for a while, you don't have to switch to live to break it out of the fast. I would, if as long as it's not losing condition, I would be more likely to just let the animal dictate when it wants to eat again.
Mm-hmm. Nailed it.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if I have much to add to that. I mean, I think that again, just the aspect of the condition of the animal and paying attention to that as like a real guide. I think of when your animals are fasting is such an important part. So I would just emphasize that.
Loss. Yeah, weight loss is okay if the animal is already overweight. So I have a diagram on reptifiles.com. You may have seen it, Chloe, but it comes from the Not Just a Pet Rock Facebook group that I use with their permission. And ideal ball python body condition kind of looks like a Hershey's Kiss. Okay,
yeah.
You're gonna have a spinal ridge, a little bit of a pudge when they're sitting on a flat surface. If they're perfectly round, then they're fat. If they've got a divot where the spine is, that means they're obese. So that's the general, like if you were to take a cross section of the snake at its widest point, that's the kind of shape you're looking for when you're assessing body condition.
Yeah, well said. Cool. Well, for folks in the chat, we will get to the live chat questions towards the end after we go through the questions we've already taken in through Happy Dragons Plus. So just hang tight and we will get to your questions towards the end. So yeah, let's go to our best way to set up an automatically controlled monitored enclosure for temps, lighting, etc. I have a Euro and would like to control the atmosphere in there a little better. Is there an app for that? Thank you. So this one is complicated because it has a lot to do with what are the conditions in your room. What are your baseline kind of ambient conditions in your room are going to have a big impact on this. For myself, I really like to try and actually control the room as much as possible and set kind of baseline parameters within my room first, and then try to refine the parameters in each enclosure from that point. So the way I kind of control the baseline parameters in my room in terms of temperature is through a mini split, and that's like a heat pump / AC unit that fits on the wall, and they're kind of expensive, but they're also a pretty common way that people heat and cool their homes, and they're very highly efficient, which is great. So they're not as costly to run as say like a oil-filled space heater or something like that. Because they're a lot more efficient than that typically. So that's like one thing I would say just in general is like consider what you can do to try and make the conditions in the room that you're using as stable as possible. And then from there, for an automatically controlled monitored enclosure, in terms of like automating like your lights and like your thermostats and all of that, there are several different commercially available thermostats that will both allow you to control when your lights are coming on and off, whether or not they're dimming on and off or just turning on and turning off at full brightness. The Herpestat by Spider Robotics is a popular and pretty reliable model. That's what I tend to use here, but there's others as well. Vivarium Electronics tends to have a pretty good reputation from what I understand. And those are great for that. Then again, they're kind of like a bit pricier, and for like a more budget friendly option, you can also utilize smart plugs. There are a whole bunch of different smart plugs out there. Casa is a good brand for those, KASA. And what those will allow you to do is determine, when you want your lights to come on and when you want them to come off. You can even cycle them for multiple different cycles within a 24-hour period, which can be great. And as far as how you control the temps and all of that, I mean, a thermostat is a great choice, but what I often recommend for folks is to figure out what you want your basking what you want your basking area temperature to be, and then determining a bulb that will reach that temperature when operating at full power. That way, if, for example, you have, if you go for a larger wattage bulb, say, than what's needed to heat that area, and something happens with your thermostat and it fails or something like that, it could potentially overheat your vivarium if it fails in an on position, if that makes sense. So one way that I like to try and do that is to figure out what will work to heat the area with the lowest wattage bulb possible to fit that space. So those are some of like tips that I have right off the top of my head that I would offer, but I'd love to hear from Mariah and Phil, because I know that you both do this as well.
Yeah. So I don't know of any reliable all-in-one app yet that integrates everything and controls everything from one spot. I would love to see something someday that will actually enable you to individually control climate control and enclosure. It would be a beautiful thing. It's also a very complicated project. I've seen people try, but I've never seen it succeed. So still waiting on that technology. Lights, yeah. I am a smart switch kind of girl. I have a lot of them that I control from my phone to sync the rhythms of my lamps. It's not perfect. For example, I can't scale the lamps. I can't dim them up and down, which I would really like to do. But the good news is there is a product that was just released that will do that, and it is compatible with UVB, with LED, and help me out, guys. It's Arcadia's Luminize, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's the Luminize line, and they're pricey, but they do integrate into an app, I believe, that allows you to not only sync it to local or to desired sunrise and sunset times, but it will scale the turn on instead of just on and off, and it will scale the turn off as well. So you get a more natural gradient over the course of the day of visible and ultraviolet light. I believe there are some thermostats that will do this for heat lamps as well. Like Roy was saying, with heat lamps, you really, really want to go for the least wattage to do the job. And that's not just because of the risk of overheating the animal. It's also because dimming the lamp too much, actually, not even too much. As soon as you start dimming a halogen heat lamp, its infrared output profile changes significantly. The output shifts from infrared A heavy to infrared B and C heavy. Essentially makes it the same thing as a deep heat projector or any other carbon filament type projector lamp. And that's not what you want, because it's that infrared A, that deep penetrating infrared radiation energy that you want for your animals. And that's really the whole point where you'd be using a halogen lamp, right? So personally, I'm not a fan of dimmers. I don't really use them with my heat lamps anymore. I just pick the heat bulb that's going to get into the range of the optimal heating, the optimal basking temperature that I want. And then I let the animal do the regulating by itself. And I'll just watch them to make sure, check their behavior, see if they're avoiding it, if I need to do some other things. But for me, my bigger concern with heat lamps and thermostats is to not put the probe on and this is, by the way, in favor of, instead of putting the probe on the basking area, put the probe for the heat lamp on the coolant. And this prevents overheating, which is going to be a bigger issue. Underheating of reptiles causes problems over the course of like months. Overheating causes problems like within days, if that. So when you ensure that the animal has an appropriate cool area to retreat to when it's feeling too warm, enable it to thermoregulate effectively, that's more important actually than trying to get exactly 105 degrees on the basking spot, which it's a whole, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I'm not the one to talk about it because I'm still getting familiar with this concept
Hmm.
myself. But exact basking spot temperatures are not really as important as we may have made them out to be as a community. Anyway,
Yeah.
I've said too much. Phil, I know you have some valuable contributions here.
I don't know that I don't think I'll be able to contribute much more given what you two have already put forward. But what I'll say is that I actually do everything completely differently here. Like I am really, really old school. I don't have any apps. I have very little automated stuff. I do a lot of turning things on and turning things off manually by like just myself. I do a lot of going by feel. I don't measure quite that much here. Like I tend to just I operate by watching the animals. I operate by seeing what they like, what they don't like, what they're avoiding, what they're seeking. I like implementing some level of chaos in their day to day, and I feel like I am able to do that better than most of the apps and all these things. I like during the summer months in particular, I put a lot of emphasis into uh, having the incandescent and basking bulbs off in the morning, letting the animals have a couple hours of just UV lighting on, letting the ambient temperature come up, then kicking on all the basking light, then kicking them off in the early afternoon around 4 or 5, having several hours of just UV lighting. Because ambient temperatures stay very high in the summer. This saves me money on power. This makes it so the animals are not baking under the heat lights when it's a million degrees outside.
Hmm.
Kind of kills two birds with one stone. I have a tendency to do things like dumping in cool water during the hottest parts of the day to increase humidity. I do all kinds of weird stuff here that doesn't always, it might not fall in line with the way a lot of people like to do things. But that's just a personal choice for me. I've never been the kind of person who likes to automate. Outside of like my bill pay, you know what I mean? That's just not who I am. I like to play around. I like to give things a little more, a little less based on what I'm feeling, based on what I'm seeing out of the animals. So it's a little bit I don't even measure like incubation media. Like I can't remember the last time I measured anything in terms of incubation media. I just go by feeling. I just go by like, okay, these animals seem like, this is desert animal. It's probably going to be a little bit drier, but like some modest humidity. Okay, this is like something that might need a little bit more humidity. I just don't measure anything anymore. And it's been a long time since I've done that. So unfortunately, it's it's a little bit hard for me to say like, okay, here's some stuff to think of doing on this particular topic. Does that
Hmm.
all make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's normal for most experienced reptile keepers is they start to do a lot
Yeah.
more things by feel and observation and a lot less on the
Yeah.
exact numbers.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
it's
really appreciate what you said there about like the like specific basking temperatures being like a little bit of like maybe the wrong focal point,
Hmm.
Mhm.
because for me it's so much more about getting the right combination of both surface and air temperature, and then also getting enough of space where the animal can fit its body at peak temperature from tip of nose to tip of tail. I feel
Mhm.
like you can do those things and you can still have like a slightly cooler basking temperature than you
Hmm.
might have been told, and the animal's still going to operate very well. They're very efficient, right? This is why you see people who take temperature guns who go out into the middle of winter in Florida where their animals are kept outdoors and it's in the 50s, and they temp gun the animal, it's in the 80s or 90s, and it's like because
Mhm.
they're really good at utilizing the sunlight that they're getting.
Hmm.
So I mean, I just think this is all part and parcel of that. um yeah, I think it's a great point.
Yeah, it's all about the quality of the energy that they're receiving and how much they're getting. I wonder, I mean, if you compare a halogen lamp versus a ceramic heater, the difference between the way that the two warm reptiles is so different that it's very difficult to actually burn a reptile, say a snake or a lizard, with a halogen lamp, as
Hmm.
long as obviously they're not making direct contact with it. But it's very easy to actually burn a reptile if you're using a ceramic heater as the only source of heat,
Hmm.
just because of the way that the infrared works,
Yeah.
which is very interesting and kind of scary. And that's when exact temperatures become a lot more important. Same for, heat mats. Oh, I don't think we ever addressed humidity.
Yeah.
Controlling humidity. there's such thing as a hygrostat,
Yeah.
which is really nice. That's often a more hands-on thing that I've noticed. The last thing you want to do for controlling humidity is to reduce ventilation, because that's the recipe for disease.
Yeah.
Instead, you just add more water to the environment. Foggers are nice, but they can be they're high maintenance. You've got to clean them a lot. You got to make sure you're using distilled water. Like, yeah, a lot can go wrong when the animal is breathing micro droplets of water. That might be laden with bacteria. I mean, that delivers bacteria right into their lungs. Of course, if it's an animal that is from an area that experiences a lot of fog naturally, that's a different question. They're evolved for it. The chameleons, abronia lizards, those, yeah, fog is really good for those guys. But it's not a golden bullet, silver, whatever.
Silver bullet.
Silver bullet for humidity. Instead, personally, I really favor misting systems, because you can kick them on, get a bunch of, water misted all over the enclosure. It's adhering to the decor, to the walls, etc., and then it slowly evaporates into the air. And then the next time, humidity drops between a certain level, you can have your hygrostat kick that back up again, with up and down, and you have these fluctuations, which is fine. Fluctuations within a certain range are normal and fine. And of course, things like making sure the animal always has a moist hide to access as needed, making sure that if it's a tropical species, that the substrate contains a certain amount of moisture without getting soggy. Humidity is a whole thing, but hygrostats are there. I think misting systems are great as long as you pay really close attention to it when you're setting it up, so that it doesn't actually flood your enclosure while you're at work. Then you have to basically get rid of your substrate, which is always fun. But what I like about keeping things as unregulated as possible is that it helps prevent the condition of captivity-related stagnation. When an animal has the same exact environmental conditions every day, we might think that's ideal, but it's actually incredibly boring. I mean, imagine if you lived in a place where it's 75 degrees every single day, always sunny, and there was always a breeze of 5 miles per hour. That's it. Always the same. It's incredibly boring. One of the things we like about nature, even as humans, is how it changes. We might, joke around about living in the mountains. You never know what weather we're going to have in an hour, but it's fun. Right. It's exciting, and it shakes reptiles up out of their stupor. And it's one of the many ways that we can help make their lives interesting is by making their weather interesting. So like what Phil was saying, shake up their wake up time. If it's cloudy outside and raining, maybe turn the lights off or most of the lights off for the day. Stuff like that. If the animal is already healthy and well energized, fluctuations like that are not going to cause problems. They're actually going to be pretty enriching.
Absolutely. So well said.
100%.
All right, should we move on to our next question?
Yeah, we better.
Okay. I'll read it off and then I'll let you take the lead, Mariah. Is that good?
Sure.
Okay, so this one's from Gregory of the Reptile Studio. Okay, here we go. My question starts with a statement. I recently sold my viper geckos and moved my anoles into my carpet python enclosure. Because I'm planning to breed garter snakes, starting with Martianus, the checkered garter, I built the subadults a large custom reptile habitat enclosure with a semi-arid section and a more temperate section. What advice do you have for me regarding breeding this underappreciated and wildly entertaining species?
The garter snakes.
Yeah.
I have very little advice on breeding any reptile. I do the normal care aspect of husbandry. Breeding is the half of husbandry that I do not focus on, because when it comes to breeding, that is something you need hands-on experience with. It's very much harder to become an expert and then give advice on breeding if you've never bred the species before. There's just a lot more nuance to it that a general overarching philosophy does not help with. I know a guy who's had a lot of success breeding garter snakes. if you want to reach out to him, it's Don's Garters. He's one
Mm-hmm.
of the foremost garter snake breeders in the U.S. Um, I will say, from what I've read, when it comes to breeding reptiles, replicating the conditions of their natural environment as closely as possible, especially seasonal rhythms like rainy seasons, dry seasons,
Mm-hmm.
cool seasons, warm seasons, that kind of thing, those changes are going to help encourage the animal to want to breed because it's actually connected to their hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to give them the right input that is going to make their hormones say, "Hey, it's sexy time, let's go." So, and in fact, keeping them in a stagnant environment. Am I allowed to say that?
That was awesome. That was
You
just,
said it. I think it's
yes,
great.
it was just a really funny way to say it.
Yep. There you have it. I guess I'm not taking it back. Anyway, um,
Nope.
keeping them in a stagnant, completely the same controlled environment can actually kill breeding efforts because of that. Um, in fact, the Animals at Home podcast recently, I found it so interesting. The episode with the guy and the fish.
Jamie Woods.
Jamie Woods, yeah. I'm a huge fan now.
Yeah, he's
So it's
great.
embarrassing to put his name.
He's been on our show too.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. So anybody listening, go listen to those episodes. They are mind-blowing and amazing, and you will totally get something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But he was talking about how to get certain species of fish to breed, you need to let the water evaporate off, drop the water level, get all of the various chemicals and compounds in the water all concentrated, and then just add a bunch of cool water all at once to simulate a rainy season.
Mm-hmm.
And dilute that, change the water temperature immediately, and that often sparks breeding behavior for fish. And it's stuff like that when you pay attention to what they how they evolved and the seasonal inputs that they are looking for that basically tell them on an instinctive level, hey, right now is a good time for you to have babies because they're more likely to survive at this time of year. That's all I've got for breeding.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, people who've actually bred reptiles, go.
I think that's great. I mean, yeah, I have not bred garter snakes personally, so I can't speak to breeding that genus of snakes, although they are amazing and I appreciate them a lot. I would offer the same advice around seasonal replication as much as you can. And one piece I would add to that is to consider food abundance in relationship to seasonal replication. That's another big factor that I found has an impact on breeding certain species. So, for example, you know, when you're getting the spring, you know, and you're getting all this abundant rain, you're getting abundant plant growth. That's going to then have an impact on essentially prey species as well. Their abundance will increase. They're going to be responding to that, and that is often an indicator to animals as well that they have sufficient resources to then reproduce. A lot of species will not reproduce if they don't have sufficient resources. Essentially, if they don't have sufficient body condition to do so. So that's another element I would add in there. What about you, Phil? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. So the stuff that I'm going to suggest is going to be a little bit not specific in the same way that your guys' was, because I've never bred garter snakes, but the kind of advice I give people when they're asking for advice on breeding mostly revolves around stick-to-itiveness and just seeing it through. Like it doesn't matter. Like really at the end of the day, it does not matter. You're going to be successful if you keep working with the animals long enough. You focus on their well-being, they will breed. Like they're not idiots. This is what they evolved to do. In fact, it's going to be more difficult to prevent them from breeding given the best care and the best circumstances and the best setup. So like really at the end of the day, if it's got something to do with an undervalued, underappreciated, or perhaps underrepresented animal in herpetoculture, it really comes down to just like sticking with them and don't give up, because most people give up within the first 6 months of keeping. So just don't do that. Just keep going. That's my advice. Just keep going.
Really good advice there. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the next question. So this one is from Savannah, and it's for you, Mariah. What is your
Oh,
origin story?
oh boy. My origin story. So, back when I was a very small Mariah, I've always had an interest in animals and how to care for them. I was definitely one of those kids who couldn't live without having a pet of some kind, um, whether it was a snail or or a rat or or a green anole or a horse. That's actually where my passion for husbandry really started, was horses, um, which seems to be a common thing. I'm still trying to figure out what the horse to reptiles pipeline is, but um, yeah, I started there. I read all the books on horse husbandry, how to keep horses optimally, because I couldn't have a horse, so I just learned how to care for them instead, and this became a pattern for the rest of my life. Um, the and I mean, I even had like a drawer in my dresser that was full of horse supplies that I had saved up my allowance and picked up for the day that hopefully I would finally get a horse. Um, I was that horse girl in elementary and middle school. Now, well, I couldn't get a horse. Aside from reading about horse husbandry, I kind of scratched that itch by keeping a variety of other pets, snails, fish, little bit into reptiles. Those were harder to keep when I was young. So fish were the big thing for the most part. Um, I attempted breeding betas. It did not work, but I did try my darndest, and I annoyed one particular Petco employee to no end. And I was just very passionate about learning how to keep animals with the limited resources and understanding that I had at the time of animal husbandry. And I liked to write down everything that I learned. I would print off pages from websites. I'd go at it with a highliner and make notes, and then I'd like compile it in a notebook of notes that, like, okay, here's the things that have in common. Like, I was doing all that from a very young age. Um, and eventually I took a break for a while. Getting into college took a priority. My mom didn't want me turning the house into a zoo anymore. So that was briefly sidetracked until I got married and I had my own place again. I didn't have to worry about roommates' opinions. And my husband and I were talking, and we realized that, hey, we have our own place. If the landlord says yes, we could get a bearded dragon. I'm like, you had bearded dragons growing up. I've always wanted a bearded dragon. Let's do it. And so we did. We got a couple of bearded dragons, put them in a 90-gallon tank with a great budget setup with some red sand. Oh no, I think we started them off on like shelf liner, really thick, cushy shelf liner, and a under counter non-reflective T8 fixture for the UVB that was like 6 inches away from the basking branch, and I think we had like some flagstone in there. Yeah, it was a setup, but it was a start. And as I was getting everything ready for our bearded dragon, which became bearded dragons unexpectedly, the I realized that there's a lot more information on the internet about caring for animals than when I had been a kid. And it made things more confusing rather than helpful, especially now because there were social media groups and just lots of conflicting information and a lot of misinformation. So back then I told myself, I have this opportunity to start a website. I've always wanted to kind of try to get a blog going because my sister was a food blogger at the time and she seemed to be really enjoying it, and I can't be outdone by her. So I decided to try my hand at that. So I wrote up all of my notes on bearded dragon husbandry from according to my understanding back then, and I slapped them online. And mostly it was a reference for myself, but it was also a reference for anybody who found it and found it helpful. And I enjoyed it. It tapped into a part of myself that, I had set aside for a while. I loved the research aspect of it, and there were people who did find it helpful. And I really enjoyed that aspect of helping people with their animals as well. And so it kind of snowballed from there. Just this little tiny side blog about a variety of things, including reptile care, and I would upload my notes on the other reptiles that I acquired to the same site and organize them and try to do better every time. And then around the same at some point there was a real turning point where I was taking a technical writing class for my bachelor's degree, and the professor was very interesting. His job with the university was kind of a side gig, and he was a freelancer for the most part. He worked on his own terms with his own passions, and he gave us this assignment. It was a graduation requirement to write a 20-page paper. And so the assignment was, okay, I want you to write a 20-page technical manual on any topic of your choosing. And I went, any topic? 20 pages is no problem. So I went at it, and it really stretched me. I had to do more in-depth research. I had to do a better job with my citations, all kinds of stuff. And I worked with this professor extensively. I practically lived in his office, I feel like, just trying to get this just right. And meanwhile, he was mentoring me about when he saw my passion for it. And he said, you've got this passion. I bet you could make a job out of this. I bet you could make a career. And that mentorship changed my life. And that's what really caused me to stop doing Reptifiles just as this like little hobby on the side to maybe something more concerted, something that I took a lot more seriously. And from there, I really tried to make it into a job. And that's much closer to where I am today. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting there. And that's really, really exciting to know that I've built this career from something that not only didn't exist at the time, but from something that I'm very passionate about. And that's not to say that there are not things about this job that I dislike and, dare I say, even hate. But it's what I chose, and I feel like I'm doing good in the world, and I get a chance to grow as a person in the process, and that's exciting to me, and that's why I enjoy it. So yeah, there's my origin story. Lots of little things that kind of snowballed into what it is today. I have people who are like, hey, I want to do what you do. And I'm like, in the most loving way possible, good luck, and I don't recommend it. This is very much an exception to the rule. Go find a real job.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I love it.
So there you have it.
Nothing like a little bit
stuff.
of equine obsession and sibling rivalry to set you on the right path,
Yeah, for real.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's the argument for having multiple kids is your kids won't get anywhere in life if they don't have siblings to challenge them.
It's real. There's some pretty significant ways in which my life was shaped by rivalry with my older sister, but that's a story for another time.
I was about to ask, neither of you is an older child, or only child, right?
Phil.
I'm not any. I was until older. My little brother was born when I was already out of the house. So,
So just
yeah.
jealous excuse then. Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Our next question. Our next one is from Elizabeth, and it says, I have a lot of difficulty getting a balance that is moist enough but not too moist in my blue tongue skink's vivarium. I find the automated setups very confusing. He didn't like the moist hide, so I ended up using a sprayer with warm water, especially around shedding time. I often wish there was a way to buy a full setup for him with someone to explain in person how to use it correctly, but as I don't have anyone near me who can do that, I do the best I can. So, getting it moist enough but not too moist in the vivarium. I can start on this one since you just did a bunch of talking, Mariah, and give you a little break, and then...
Please.
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is that why not have both in the same space? And that's to say that I mean establish a gradient as much as you can in the vivarium. So, I mean, obviously you don't want your whole vivarium to be wet and too moist or too dry, but if you can, what you can do is start to work with trying to establish a gradient from one end to the other, where there's a range of options for the lizard to then try and self-regulate. And so one way that I aim to do this in a lot of my vivaria is by first of all, I tend to place the water reservoir, the water bowl, on the cool end of the aquarium or of the vivarium, and then oftentimes I will, just when I'm filling up the water or changing it, I will overfill it a little bit, and just like let the water kind of saturate the substrate near the water bowl. And because the heat source is on the opposite end of the vivarium, it tends to stay a lot drier underneath that heat source. And there tends to be a natural gradient that can kind of form from a little bit wetter underneath the water bowl on that cool end to nice and dry under the warm end. That said, it's not totally perfect. It's not the only way to do it, but that's one way that I've experimented with that, and ways to do a moist hide. So you can even do like, it's possible that, what I mean by saying that is it's possible the lizard just didn't like the actual hide itself, even if it wanted that, moisture refuge. So you could also experiment with the things even as simple as like, a flat of cork or a round of cork on the ground that's packed with moist sphagnum moss or something like that. These are all things that I've tried to do to, again, establish more gradients, more options for the animals to then take use of. But again,
well put.
One thing about this question that's a bit challenging is, and maybe you can contact us offline, message us or something about this, but it'd be helpful to have more parameters of the vivarium itself. So it'd be helpful to know like what are the parameters, like the size of the setup and what are you using for your heat source and lighting, and anything like that is helpful context. So what do you think, Mariah?
Yeah, options and enabling the animal to self-regulate as much as possible is usually the sweet spot. Reptiles know how to take care of themselves if you give them a way for them to do it. And so one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for larger setups is because even though they can be more complicated and more expensive to set up, you give the animal more options for self-regulating according to needs that can change day by day and hour by hour. So rather than just one moist hide, why not a few? So that he can choose whatever one feels right to him at a given moment. Maybe one hide that's larger than the other, something more cramped, something more spacious, something that's wetter, something that's a little bit drier, something that's lined with soil, another thing that's lined with sphagnum moss, leaf litter. Options like that are going to increase your likelihood of success. Also, there are things that you might not be thinking of as humid hides. For example, if you have a large enough plant, hiding amidst the foliage of a plant, that is a humid microclimate. Underneath, inside of a moist, like cork log, that's a humid microclimate. So if you don't think so much in terms of like hide boxes and caves and think more in terms of humid microclimates, then your options start to open up a little bit more. And yeah, I can't blame you on automatic misting systems. My own big mist king was set up by my husband because I took one look at the instructions and said, "Screw this! I'm not doing this. Get over here, Mr. Handyman." They're more complicated than I would like them to be. Once you have it figured out, it's not so bad. But that first time setting one up is a real pain. And especially when you're dealing with a humid species, if you live in a dry climate where you need to be misting more than like morning and evening to get the right parameters, or, like adding water overnight, that kind of thing, automatic misting systems really can be helpful. There are certain systems that are easier to use. The Reptizoo mini mister isn't bad. The only problem with it is that it's very weak, and so it can only power 2 nozzles from one unit. So if you have anything bigger than like a 2x2 box, then you're going to need additional units. For a 4x2, I can get along more or less all right with 2 units. So that's something to keep in mind. Is there are simpler options out there, even though the Mist King is generally considered to be top of the line. There's others that are simpler as well, like the Exoterra's is fairly good. Not as big a fan personally of the Zoomid automatic misting system, but they do usually come with built-in reservoirs, which can be a pain to remove, clean, and keep filled, as well as it just makes things overall bulkier. So that's something to keep in mind there, but you do have options. The nice thing about the Monsoon is that it does have different sizes, even if it is pricey. But doing things that will help trap water from those misting sessions, like a bioactive enclosure, those are pretty dang good at maintaining humidity. Like from the deep substrate to the mulch and the leaf litter that you usually put on top, to the live plants, all of that really helps trap moisture and create an enclosure that is in itself a humid microclimate compared to the rest of your house. So it can be very difficult to keep blue tongue skinks in a bioactive because they're bulldozers, and they often take great joy in destroying their plants. It's a wonderful form of enrichment for them. It's a massive pain in the butt for us. So that is something to keep in mind. And of course, you can have a functional bioactive setup without a plant's roots interacting with the soil. So taller enclosure, even maybe this is, yeah. I could go off on a whole tangent about using the size of the animal and the plants that it would need to dictate the size of the enclosure. But yeah, that's a whole thing. Start with humid microclimates. Think of ways that you can trap humidity better. So that's leaf litter, multiple humid hiding areas throughout the enclosure, stuff like that, and see where that gets you. And yeah, like Roy was saying, if you're having difficulty still after remodeling your enclosure a little bit, get in touch with us. Phil, do you have anything to add? Humidity is not usually your thing.
No, yeah, exactly.
We call them arid only for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel, yeah, when you live in a dry climate, the last thing you want to do is wrestle with humidity.
Gotta play into your strengths, man.
Yeah, well said. All right, we have one more submitted question, and then we'll get into the live chat. So this is from an anonymous user, and it says, have you had success with semi-arid bioactive setups? What tips would you recommend to maintain an active cleanup crew and live plants in a drier environment? An example, a leopard gecko habitat.
Yeah, that is semi-arid.
Roy,
were you going to start on this, or Phil?
I can start. I'm happy to. I would say it's a challenge. It's a truly arid bioactive setup is not something that I think is really achievable. A semi-arid to like temperate bioactive setup, I think is a little bit closer to it being possible, but still to achieve like a truly like closed loop bioactive kind of setup like you can achieve in some tropical setups, it's pretty challenging to do, if not impossible. So I would say that you can explore what kind of isopods might do well in a semi-arid setup. There are some that do better than others in drier setups, and they will help in some respects. And I think that, like, again, going back to that episode of Animals at Home podcast that Mariah referenced earlier with Jamie Woods, having microfauna in your environments does provide just biofeedback, and which is a form of enrichment, or it can potentially be a form of enrichment. So it's something to think about. And I have had some success doing semi-arid bioactives for example, with my tricolor hognose snakes. A lot of people have the impression that that's a tropical species, but they're actually a semi-arid savanna species from the Chaco region of South America. And I've kept isopods in there with them, and I've also been able to keep some springtails alive in those setups, although they typically, what ends up happening is those springtails and isopods tend to be localized to the areas of the environment where there's more moisture, and they won't be able to spread throughout the entire setup in the same way. And so, yeah, it's a challenge, I would say, to have a true bioactive semi-arid setup. I think that there's some benefit to including microfauna in those setups anyway, if you can keep them alive under the specific conditions you're working with. But to eliminate things like spot cleaning and stuff like that for like a leopard gecko habitat, I think that it's going to be not worth it. What do you think, Mariah?
Phil, do you want to say anything first? I feel like I've been bulldozing you this whole time.
No. It's okay. Not at all. You haven't been doing that, and I tend to talk too much anyway, so it's good for me to just keep my mouth shut for a little while. But unfortunately, I've also never had success doing any bioactive anything ever. So you got the wrong guy, man. I'm not these aren't the droids you're looking for, like.
Okay, well then, I have been working on and experimenting extensively with semi-arid bioactive. I would say that my Sudan-flated lizard attempt failed. I think the substrate got too packed. In the new enclosure, I'm going to try again. It's getting a full refresh, and I'm going to see what I'm doing wrong. My northern blue-tongue skink enclosure, yeah, they're a fairly semi-arid to temperate species, is doing pretty well, I think. A very thriving population of CUC that includes superworms, powder orange isopods, dwarf isopods, springtails, earthworms, and I think that's everything. The earthworms like to hang out underneath the water bowl because that is where it is wettest. The superworm beetles march everywhere and do a great job of dealing with hard to reach waste. Powder orange isopods, they're a highly resilient species. Porcellio pruinosus, I think. I'm really terrible with the scientific names of isopods. But yeah, so them and dwarf and the blues are really great. Dwarf whites are great for species that have a tendency to eat isopods. They're relatively resilient, and they're a lot smaller and harder for those animals to see. Unless you have like mourning geckos, then good luck. Yeah, I love superworms as a CUC, actually. If you give them enough moisture and enough space, they churn the soil so well. Like mulch, fine mulch, like fine orchid bark is their bread and butter. You put a layer of that on top of the substrate, and it really helps just keep things going. And they're voracious eaters. I have an aloe in there. I've tried other plants. Grasses tend to be a little bit, they're not evergreen enough usually, so they die, and I have to be constantly replacing them every year. That's the other issue usually with semi-arids, is getting the right plants. And the problem with cacti and succulents is they have very limited root systems. They don't go very far. So you have to plant a lot of them. That's something I'm experimenting with in my oscillated skink enclosure. It's a big 4x2x2 that houses a colony of 6 adult females. And it has 3 aloes, 2 haworthia, 1 echeveria or something along those lines, maybe just a smaller aloe, and then there's a elephant feed. So there's a lot of plant soil interaction going on with that thing, as well as the fact that oscillated skinks are a partially fossorial species. So their placement also helps churn the soil and gets them. And why I put this emphasis on churning the soil is bringing waste from the top and introducing it to the bottom. One, that aeration really helps keep the beneficial bacteria and fungi alive in the soil, because they're doing a lot of work in a bioactive. And that fresh smell that you get from a bioactive enclosure comes from the beneficial bacteria and fungi. Specifically, what is the name of that compound that you smell? Wet earth, damp earth, that smell. You're smelling bacteria, actually. Yeah, petrichor. That comes from bacteria, which, might be a gross thought at first, but bacteria everywhere. Some are good, some are bad, some are neutral, and those are the good ones. There's a reason you should be enjoying that smell. It's a sign of a healthy bioactive setup. A sour smell is usually a bad sign. unless, you know, the animal's food is usually smells like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so yeah, I would say the ocellated skink one seems to be doing pretty well. The biggest problem is that the CUC, I'm relying heavily on the plants and the beneficial bacteria to be doing a lot of the work because they're 8-inch long insectivores, guys. They eat every single isopod they can find.
Oh yeah.
So I just keep having to add isopods to the enclosure, and
Yeah.
hope that, you know, there's enough hiding spaces for them in there that if you can survive to maintain. Yeah, because otherwise everything just gets eaten. And so that is part of bioactive or vivarium maintenance, is replenishing your CUC.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not talked about enough. Is, you know, it's good to keep a side colony
Mm-hmm.
so that if you notice that things have gone awry, you can do some topping up.
Yeah.
I also have a viper gecko set up, so very similar to leopard geckos. The viper geckos are on a Josh's Frogs desert biobedding, I believe. It's been going great, actually. I'm really happy with the way it's going. The only thing, again, isopods are a little bit tricky because the viper geckos have a taste for isopods. I mean, what else do you feed something that small, really? It can be tricky sometimes. I'm looking at it right now. The plant I have, since it's a small 24 by 18 by 24 enclosure, I have one plant in there. It is a rampaging ice plant. It's doing great. It's doing its job. Its root system's everywhere. It's really, really well established, and it's doing a great job. But so, and the parameters are good. They have dry area on top of the rocks in the basking area, and then they also have more moist areas near the soil, microclimates underneath pieces of wood, inside the plant, or like within the plant's foliage itself. So I'm not going to say it's impossible. It's a lot easier to do on a small scale than it is a large scale, or with larger animals, because the larger animals terrorize plants, and that's where it gets tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Paying attention to the humid microclimates, making sure that the animals have a place to dry off is good, but also don't go the other direction. Don't fear water. That's a big mistake that a lot of people try to make with semi-arid bioactives, is they fear water. And so they underwater everything. Everything dries up and everything dies. Moisture is key to life, and these semi-arid species need moist or humid microclimates in their environment to
Absolutely.
be able to stay hydrated, shed appropriately, etc. So making sure to provide a lot of humid microclimates, but plenty of ventilation so that water that you add doesn't just get trapped and cause problems in the enclosure is also big. There's a lot of things. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm just going to say it's tricky and requires tweaking and maybe more maintenance than what you might be used to if you're experienced with a tropical vivarium.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Well said.
But yeah, full arid, no.
No.
Don't try. It's not going to work. Everything in there is supposed to be dead.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes. Except the Euro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except Europe.
Basically.
All right. Well, okay, so we'll move to the live chat now. I see that there's already some questions that have been put into the live chat. Thank you again to everyone who submitted questions for the that other portion. That was great. So our first question comes from Elizabeth. Do other species also spontaneously fast for a period of time when they're acting normally in every other respect, like lizards?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of species do, especially species that come from, I would say, like environments where there's significant temperature variation throughout the year. It's more likely to see long periods of fasting, but it can also occur in equatorial species that have what I would describe as like a passive feeding strategy. Like a good example of that would be like a blood python, something like that. You know, that's a species that can go a very, very long time without eating. Yeah, and that's just how they're adapted. So it definitely depends on the species. There are some species where if they start to fast, it is a concern. And so it's definitely highly variable, but there are a lot of species that fast.
Absolutely.
And you know a lot about fasting in desert species.
Oh yeah, they
Phil
all
does.
fast. Yeah, seasonal food preference, fasting during brumation, fasting during estivation when it's too hot. I mean, the whole thing. They all do it. Every animal will do it, and it's just good for them. Period. Yeah. Honestly, it's a very good short answer. Yes. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, do your species on the animal itself. Get familiar
Yeah.
with their seasonal activity patterns, and also getting familiar, even if you're not planning on breeding a species. Talking to people who have bred the species can be helpful because they'll tell
Hmm.
you what their patterns are like and what times of year they not only are likely to go off feed, but maybe
Yeah.
need to go off feed as well.
Yeah, that's well said.
Hmm.
Like for example, I work with tricolor hognose snakes. It's one of the species I breed here, and my male tricolor barely eats during breeding season. He has one thing on his mind, and it is not food. And and the first year that I was keeping them, and the first year of his maturity, I was a little bit concerned. I was like, why won't he eat? And then I realized, like, oh, this is just what he does. And then after a few months, he went back to eating normally. But during that initial active breeding period of the year, he does not eat. So things like that can be helpful context a lot of the time.
Blue tongue skinks, northern blue tongue skinks will do it, especially if you have a male.
Oh
They
yeah.
will go off. Mine, every single like January, February, March, around that time, it stresses me out because he's a rehab, and so he doesn't have body weight to really lose in the first place. And then he stops eating, so I'm like, here's some crested gecko diet. You want it? Like, don't become a skeleton again. I pray.
Yeah. It's
It's
stressful.
really hard to fight these things. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just what they.
Over time, I trust it more and more. I will say I get less and less anxious about stuff like that than I used to. But
Yeah, but then during the wet season, or the on season, you're just like, okay, eat.
yes, exactly.
Hmm.
All
It's
right,
true.
so looks like we've got another question. It is, what is the value of adding a bit of chaos for your reptile? I feel like we spoke to this a
Yeah.
little bit, but Phil, this is primed
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah. Consistency is highly boring, and it's not good to. Chaos is more. The natural world is highly inconsistent in very consistent ways. It's consistently inconsistent, right? So, providing chaos is more natural. It's cognitively, mentally, and physically stimulating, and it's a more naturalistic way of doing things. That's the short and sweet of it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things about naturalism you have to be careful, right? A lot of the
Hmm.
people who don't like naturalism are going to tell you, well, not everything in nature is good. Da, da, da. Okay, we're not talking about
Yeah, the
adding a predator
naturalistic
to a
fallacy.
breeding cluster. We're not talking about, making them go through a drought that pushes them to the brink of death. We're not talking about stuff. Let's use our brains, people. A little bit of common sense, please. Um, but yeah, that chaos, like I mentioned,
Hmm.
you don't want them to enter any kind of stagnation. You want to keep things fresh. And there's also such thing as positive stress.
Yeah.
Guess what? The
Yeah.
more stress you require an animal to go through, even if it's just minor stress, the better they are at dealing with major stress, such as rearranging the enclosure, so like clean outs, if you have to move house, that kind of thing. Those are major stress events for a
Yep.
reptile. If it's used to changes in its routine, even just little things like, moving a branch, offering different kinds of food, changing up
Hmm.
how often you're feeding it, little things like that, or, don't turn on the lights one day, that's going to
Hmm.
help it develop resilience. And, by the way, this works with humans too. The more
Yep.
we deal with low level stress that is not constant, the better we are at dealing with high level stress.
That's true. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep, we want resilient reptiles, so it's good for them to experience complexity, differentiation in their environment, all of those things. It's really important.
Give them trials in life.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so moving forward, we've got one from James. good homie in Arizona. It says, going back to halogen bulb selection, I'm having trouble deciding between 50 watt and 75 watt. The bulbs seem to have different spread patterns, and it's hard for me to visualize which to use. So this one, I would say, I'm assuming that the 75 watt has a broader spread pattern, which is desirable, but maybe it's getting things too hot, and the 50 watt is better temperature wise, but is more localized. So if that's what you're describing, one thing that I would suggest is maybe utilizing two bulbs. Yep. Yeah, this is something that Phil recommends a lot, again, to increase that broad basking area. But like for a 75 watt, for example, you could probably get away with two 35 watt bulbs right next to each other. You're using the same wattage, but you're just spreading it out over a bit of a broader area, and it'll likely still reach your thermal preferences that you need.
Mm-hmm. Well put.
Yeah, multiple bulbs. I mean, if you have a species that's like larger than 8-10 inches long, for lizards and for snakes, that does not help. This is on a screen. A coiled diameter of about the same size or larger, you're going to want to look into multiple bulbs, because it is an important part of efficient thermal regulation. When the animal's warming itself, you don't want to pinpoint warm only part of its body. That's not efficient. You want to create an even spread of heat over, if not all of its body, the majority of it. That's going to, there's a good theory going that tail rot in bearded dragons is caused by poor circulation related to poor heating. So stuff like that, it is important. It's inconvenient to add more lamp fixtures to the enclosure, use more bulbs, but I'm all about spreading out that basking area. I mean, for large species, maybe that requires an array of 4 to 6 lamps, but it's all about getting a large enough basking area to be healthy. And you just have to, the most annoying part about it is that it requires tweaking. And so you have to test this beforehand and make sure that it's not overheating, because that's one of the biggest issues with that. And you might discover another part of it, why it's important to have large enclosures relative to the size of the animal, is the enclosure needs to be large enough to provide an appropriate temperature gradient with an appropriately large basking site. If you can only achieve an appropriate temperature gradient at normal room temperatures with a small basking site, then the enclosure is too small.
Well said.
Hell yeah.
Okay, moving on. We've got someone calling in from Spain. That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
Veiled chameleon. How difficult is it to do a bioactive tank? I have a long enclosure, 3 foot high by 6 foot. I would say refer to the section that we were talking about, the semi-arid, because the veiled chameleon would fit into that category. I think it's possible to do, like Mariah was saying, some aspects of a bioactive setup for a veiled. And you also asked if they would be likely to eat the springtails and isopods. I don't think they would eat the springtails at all, and most of the isopods would probably be safe from the chameleon while they're down at floor level, just because chameleons are arboreal. Most of the prey that they're going to be eating is going to be up on their level, and they're unlikely to go down and try and forage at ground level for things like that. So if you have like a nice litter layer down at the bottom for your isopods to hide in, most of them will probably stay safe while they're down there, and all bets are off if they decide to climb.
Yeah.
It's true.
Don't take the semi-arid thing too far. They do require a great deal of moisture in their environment. There are certain rhythms that they need, essentially, of moisture at certain times of day, dryness at other times of day. Because with chameleons, they get most of their moisture from their ambient environment. So providing a water bowl is not going to work for you. You need to provide water on the leaves, which is why live plants are often, well, for many reasons, but live plants are often preferred for chameleons, is because they hold on to water droplets better.
Oh, yeah.
Fogging is usually required at certain times of day, particularly during part of the night. a little bit of misting, a little bit of dripping. It's a whole thing. My favorite resource for chameleon care is Chameleon Academy. Bill Strand is amazing with chameleons.
Fantastic.
His podcast
Incredible.
is primo.
Yep.
So that's the place to go for dialing that in.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one from William. Looking to acquire a chuck wallet or Uromastyx in the future. I know the care is very similar between the two, but is there a difference in their temperaments or personalities? Mariah, let's hear it. Just kidding.
Sorry, can you say that again? I'm a little bit distracted by the background noise. If you can hear it.
I just queued up the perfect question for Phil, but I had to throw in a little dig. So Phil, I think you should take this one.
Go, Phil. I'm gonna mute it.
Yeah, for sure. So, my general answer to this is that reptiles are all individuals. So, like, it's not going to be useful to say, well, chuckwallas are X, but Uromastyx are Y. There's tame chuckwallas, there's tame Uromastyx, there's flighty chuckwallas and flighty Uromastyx. It's all about the individual. It's all about the amount of time you put into it, and they all have the same potential to become a tame, great reptile pet. So it's more about what your preferences are for the way they look and the way they behave and kind of how you want to keep them, more than it is about choosing the right one with the right personality.
Mm-hmm.
Try to keep it short and sweet on that one. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's it for our questions. I don't see any others coming up in the chat, so I think we might be good.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna call it there, everybody. Thank you so much for those who tuned in. These are great questions. This was a lot of fun and a lot of good food for thought for me. So we'll be doing some more stuff soon, like we showed earlier on the quarterly. We've got an excellent live podcast coming up next week, and then the week following we're going to be doing a webinar on the history of herpetoculture. So stay tuned for that stuff, and check out Happy Dragons Plus. Use that free subscription trial, and I think you'll like it. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
I'm going to hit the button. Thanks, y'all.
Sweet.